Hey friends, I'm Otis Gibbs, and this is Michael Corcoran. He's going to talk about when Bob Dylan and the band came to Austin, Texas.
The very first time that Bob Dylan ever played, backed by the band, the Five Guys, they weren't called the band then, they were called the Hawks, from backing Ronnie Hawkins. But first time all five of them backed Bob Dylan was in Austin at Municipal Auditorium, September, I think the 24th, 1965. And that show was, besides that, it was remarkable for who was in the audience. Rocky Erickson, Tommy Hall, the guys who started the Vulcan Gas Company. I mean, this is really where, just as Dylan had switched from acoustic to electric, that show is where Austin went from folk to rock. You know, so it's really important that way. And also in the whole Dylan lore, it's the first time he ever played electric where nobody booed. And the very next night he played in Dallas at SMU. Same thing, nobody booed. And as he was leaving the stage in Dallas, you know, Dylan stopped and went back to the microphone and says, Texas audiences are the best in Austin and Dallas. And that was it, you know. So, and years later he would bring that up. But that's the thing kind of that sets Austin apart, I think, from other places, is the audience. The audiences get it. You know, when I lived in Dallas, I worked for the Dallas Morning News, and if there was a great show that I saw there, like Oasis, I'd see them and everybody's talking, and you know, Dallas is like half the crowd is facing away from the act. You know, they're just there to be seen and to get laid or whatever. But next night they played at Liberty Lunch in Austin, and I wanted to see them with a real audience that got what they were doing. So anyway, I that was one thing about it is Austin just really has great audiences. One of the guys who was in the audience was Don Hyde. He had the Raven Theater in the San Francisco area, good friends with Tom Waits and all this other stuff. And he swears that Dylan and the band opened with "Baby, Let Me Follow You Down," and that's the song they did together on The Last Waltz. He says that was why they did that song. It was the first song they ever played together. But in the set list that I've seen, they have that song being number 2. He opened with Tombstone Blues on the electric portion. He did an acoustic set first, then came out and did electric. So I don't know. I'd love to hear a recording just to get that, because Don Hyde swears it was "Baby, Let Me Follow You Down," and he was front row center. And he's one of the guys that started the Vulcan. Well, it was actually reviewed. Gilbert Shelton, who did the Fabulous Freak Brothers, he wrote a review for the Texas Rangers, and he kind of scolded the crowd as looking like high school couples on dates and sitting down when they should have been standing up, and it was a real respectful date night crowd. And he describes, you know, Dylan running around the stage, which I find hard to believe, and the crowd just not reacting. And so it's interesting though. Carolyn Heston, she's from Austin. She's a folk singer. Bob Dylan's very first recording was playing harmonica on her album that John Hammond produced. That's how John Hammond knew about Dylan. She was in the audience, and she's a folk purist. You know, she's just like out of the Joan Baez. Her and Joan Baez were, competitive, and she said it was the best she'd ever seen Dylan. Was that show? So I think, you know, back then the sound systems were crappy. So the electric thing, you couldn't hear the words, but just the energy is what everybody got into. Well, you had Robbie Robertson on guitar, Richard Manuel on keyboards. You know, it was the five guys who became the band. And then after they did a tour with Dylan, the Royal Albert Hall was the final tour that they did on that first tour. Then Dylan got in his motorcycle accident, laid low for a while, and he got back with the band and did the Basement Tapes, which is, you know, great record. And so they go back, and it's kind of weird that in Austin they were nobodies. The band was nobodies. When the next tour, the second tour they did together, they were kind of not quite equal build, but the band had the weight. You know, they had their own songs. They had their own legacy already. They were no longer a backing band. So that's kind of cool that all happened within a couple of years. There's one famous story where he went to Lucy in Disguise, which was a costume shop in Austin. And Townes Van Zandt was there. Someone told Towns, "Hey, Dylan's at Lucy in the Skies." Town goes in a car, drives down there, and they have some sort of encounter. And I don't really know, with the Towns lore, you don't know what's real, what isn't. But also Dylan, when he went to see Doug saw him at the Rome Inn with Joni Mitchell, nobody bothered him. He'd been seen at parties and such, so he did kind of get around. He would apparently, when everybody made a fuss about him, he would leave right away. And so people just realize, if you want Dylan, stay away. I saw him at the ACL Fest, and he was the headliner, and that's like the big annual festival here in Austin. He was the final headliner. And he did not allow them. This is in a field with 50,000 people. He didn't allow them to put on the jumbotron his image, and he just played keyboards. And he's a mile away, and he sounded like terror. He was horrible. As people were coming to go see Dylan, more people were leaving. So he had this loggerhead of people coming. But there's a guy in town, a professor at UT. He's like the biggest Dylan guy. And he was like going, that was one of the best Dylan shows I've ever seen. And it was the same one I went to. So I don't know. I'm a purist when it comes to vocals. That's why I like gospel music so much. Everyone in gospel can sing. There's no Lou Reed in gospel music. They're all just belters. And that's what I like about it. There was a guy in town named Chesley Milliken. He was Stevie Ray Vaughan's manager in 1980. And he ran Maynard Downs. He was a horse fanatic. He ran Maynard Downs, which was a legitimate horse racing facility, but they also had concerts, Grateful Dead concerts mainly. They had 5 Dead shows there. And Chesley hooked up Charlie Sexton with Ron Wood. Ron Wood was recording in New York, and so Sexton's playing with Ron Wood at age 16, and in walks Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan says to Charlie Sexton, "I heard of you." And this is a 16-year-old kid. But he didn't start playing with them then. He started playing with them, years later for a couple years, and then he was replaced. And Denny Freeman was Dylan's guitar player for 5 or 6 years. He's a big Austin blues guitar player in town. And I don't know if he replaced Charlie, somebody else might have did, but Charlie ended up replacing Denny Freeman, and they were like best friends. But there was a show in Austin in 1995 at the Austin Music Hall, and it was the best I've ever seen Dylan. He was unbelievable. It might have been 96, but Jerry Garcia had just passed away, and Garcia and Dylan were big buddies, and I always felt Dylan was high on something. The times I saw him in the early 90s, either drunk or on junk or something. He just was not right. But that show, he was on fire, and he was playing guitar. He was playing a lot of leads, Silvio, and I don't know. It was just an incredible show from beginning to end. And at the very end, Charlie Sexton comes out, jams with him. And I just think that because that show was so incredible and Charlie was part of it, that the next time Dylan, or he remembered Charlie from the early years and hired him, and then Charlie was there for many years. I'm not sure about the timeline. I think Charlie played with him early on and then had a long break and then played with him again and then had a break. And now this is another break. I think Charlie's playing with Elvis Costello now. Well, he doesn't play a lead all night. Charlie, he's strictly rhythm guitar, and he watches Dylan's hands, and he knows all the changes. He knows what Dylan's going to do before he does. It's that they have that connection that way, and for him to kind of put his ego beside, to not play any leads. The other guitar player plays the leads, but Charlie's just he's great that way. He's a great producer too.